Hello, my name is Mike Trabulsie. In 2015, I was building a home recording studio. And while I didn't need studio quality soundproofing, I was looking for some reasonably effective methods and materials to soundproof the rest of my home from the recording studio. I also wanted to provide some level of soundproofing outside of the studio around the perimeter of my home. I was living in the White Mountains in a standalone single-family home off the beaten path in a pretty rural area. And I didn't have any neighbors that were so close that sound was going to be an issue. Well, over the years, I've had a lot of people ask me, how did the studio come out? Were the soundproofing techniques effective? Do you have any photos of the studio? Well, I've since sold the house and the studio, but I do have some photos that I would like to share with you. And I also want to talk a little bit about the end results of the whole project. The music track that you'll hear while I'm showing you the photos is a song that I wrote and recorded in the studio with my band 587 North. The song is called Gravity, and the music video's out there, and the song's available probably most places where you get your digital music. So let's take a look at the photos, and I'll see you back here on the other side, and we'll talk about the end results of the soundproofing techniques and the whole project. The room came out really nice. It was such a great place to write, record, create, and to hang around and play in. I also had a 1935 antique Brunswick pool table in the room, and the musicians loved playing pool when they weren't recording. So the aesthetics of the room were very important. So before I get into the soundproofing, I want to talk a little bit about the surface treatments that I used in the room. The first was I used real 1/2-inch hardwood on the whole floor, except in the bathroom where I used ceramic tile. And this same wood product I used behind the drum, and it looked beautiful. And by the way, the drums sounded so great in that one. It was so much fun to play and practice and record. The second thing I did was on the back wall, on the opposite end of the studio from the drums. By the way, the studio was 40 by 28, so it was a pretty big room, and with a second floor. So on the back wall, I used, on half of the back wall was 28 feet, and it abutted my house. And on the house part, 14 feet of it was a garage, and the other 14 feet was the control room for the studio. But on half of that back wall, I used a cultured stone. I believe it was called river rock. And I could have used real stone, but that was just going to be a real complicated install. And the cultured stone had really vibrant colors. It was really beautiful. They had reds and oranges in there, just really, really nice. And the other section of that wall where I didn't use the cultured stone, there was a door to the control room, and then I built a bathroom. And then the third surface treatment I used was real red brick. I had my mason build I think the wall was maybe 3 feet, and he built it the whole length of the 40-foot wall minus the width of the bathroom, and then a door leading out. And that was an exterior wall inside the studio, but an exterior wall facing the front yard. And the last thing I did was I used 3/4 inch sheetrock, 2 layers, on the ceiling and all of the wall areas that didn't have other surface treatments. As for the soundproofing, I don't want to go into detail about why I used the methods and materials I used right here. If you haven't seen the first video on the studio, maybe you want to just take a minute and take a look at that, because I do explain in detail the materials that I used and why. But I will summarize them here. The first thing I did was I built a room within a room. I created a space in between the stud and the inside wall of the studio where the surface treatments were. And the way I accomplished this was by using these metal clips which screwed directly onto the studs, and then they come with these metal channel strips. I think I bought them in 10-foot lengths. It snaps into these clips very strongly, and they support a lot of weight. So I installed those metal clips and the channel strips, the metal channel strips, throughout the whole room, and that was what all the surface treatments went up against, except where I used a stone. I used some masonry board behind that. But installing that was very affordable, and I did the installation myself. Honestly, I think it took me 1 weekend. The second thing I did, I installed the installation before I snapped in the metal channel strips, and instead of going with a blown-in insulation or a standard fiberglass insulation, I used a much denser product. It came in 4-foot sections, and it fit and expanded into the studs. You just squeeze it a little bit and put it in, and it expands into the studs, so it fills up the space. And that insulation also has soundproofing properties, and the insulation was great. When that room heated up, it stayed warm, really kept the cold air out. You know, in the winter, in the mountains, there's a lot of winter, a real lot of winter. Let me show you a picture of my house. This is the first day of spring. I think it was 2013. And that was the first day of spring. So you can imagine how much snow we had in December, January, and February. I used to have to snowshoe around my house twice a year just to shovel out my windows so I could see outside my windows from in my house. I think the average annual snowfall where I lived was just under 90 inches. So there's a lot of winter, and insulation is important. The decisions I made on that were very good, both for insulating properties and in terms of assisting in soundproofing the room. And in the White Mountains, it's a short summer, and there's not a lot of days where you have, high humidity where you would want air conditioning. There are some, but not a lot. But I didn't have any air conditioning in this room, and in the summer, that one was very cool, really comfortable to work in. So the insulation was so tight and so effective, it kept the real humidity from getting in. The final thing I did in there was the sheetrock. I had 2 layers of 3/4 inch sheetrock, and in between these 2 layers, I put a layer of green glue. Now this green glue comes in 5-gallon pails. It's designed to assist in eliminating the transmission of sound. So what I had my sheetrock crew do was they hung the first layer of sheetrock on all the walls and the ceiling. Then the second layer, they would roll a layer of this green glue all over so it completely covered it. Then they took the sheetrock and installed it over the first layer of sheetrock, and they used a bit longer sheetrock screw to also tap into the metal channel strips. And that was the total of the soundproofing techniques that I used in the studio. People have questioned the decision to put windows in the recording studio, but for me, this was a room where I planned on writing, creating, and recording for 20 plus years, and having a room without windows was absolutely not an option. In the mountains, on a still winter's day, when the snow is falling, or in the spring when everything's blooming, or in the summer when you get a sun shower, on a still winter's night when everything is absolutely silent, seeing into the outside world can be very, very inspiring. It can bring out a really creative element in you. The $64,000 question is, was the soundproofing effective? And did the techniques I used work? And for me, did those methods and materials meet my soundproofing goals? Well, if studio level soundproofing is, we'll call that 100% soundproofing, what did I accomplish with the materials that I used? I would estimate that in the house, I got to about an 85% level of soundproofing. Now, that was in the room right behind where the studio connected to the house. Remember, they connected only at this back wall here. So in the control room, it was about an 85% level of soundproofing. You could hear the drums being played, but it wasn't offensive, and it did not inhibit the work environment of the control room. As you got into my kitchen, you could hear less of it, and then once you got into the dining room, the living room, and the bedrooms, you would have to listen very hard to hear any drumming. And I like to write and record and work very early in the morning, and that's not staying up all night. That's getting up at 3 or 4 a.m. and working all morning. For some reason, that's a creative time for me, and I love the silence at that hour of the morning, and I work at that hour of the morning all the time. So I wanted to be able to play the drums and play the piano without disturbing anybody. So for me, the soundproofing techniques were very effective in that respect. As far as outside of the studio, around the perimeter of the house, I would estimate that I accomplished about a 70% level of soundproofing directly outside and around the perimeter of the studio. Maybe a little greater in the back of the studio where there were no windows. But as you go out to my house, you couldn't really hear anything that was going on in there. So again, it wasn't 100% soundproofing level, but it was very effective, and it did accomplish my goals, and it was very affordable. These techniques that I used did not cost a tremendous amount of money, and it was a little bit more work, but nothing that you would go, oh, no way am I doing that. Also, I want to point out, when I'm giving you these estimates, these are not scientifically measured soundproofing levels. I'm giving you my estimates. The work environment, however, the aesthetics of the room, the inspiration that I felt and that I saw in other musicians when they were in the room working, the creative element was fantastic. We've all been in recording studios, and there's so much fun to be in, partly because, well, I don't know about you folks, but, I was not in them every single day. So when I got to be in a recording studio, it was just amazing to be there. But, I've been in enough of them to know they're not always the total creative spaces you like to be in. That was the attraction of a home recording studio. And that's why I used, the river rock on the walls and the red brick, built a granite shelf on that, and had the wood floors and the wood behind the drums, and built a hearth with a fireplace and furniture as a lounge, and it's why I put a pool table in there. A home studio, for me, gives you the opportunity to introduce home into the recording environment, and we all love home. It's probably the place we feel most comfortable and secure in the world. The environment was just a great place to be in. Also in that room, I wrote about 100 songs on that beautiful 1901 Chickering baby grand piano. And if you can believe it, I sold the piano when I sold the house and the studio. But I was able to write a lot of music in that room on that piano over the 3 or 4 years I worked there. And I was able to record about over 2 albums worth of material, 20 plus something songs in that room. The work environment was, for me, and what I like, it was just great. Today, as I record this follow-up video, February 2022, I have 2 of those songs in the market. Gravity, which you heard a little bit of earlier, and I'll play a little bit more of it as I close this video out. And then another song called The Hunter that I wrote, and I ended up producing it and recording it with my other rock band, Seven Veritas. And both of those songs are released on my label, Artist Rock Records. And the rest of the music that I was able to record while I owned the studio, because as you know, I eventually sold it, but the rest of the songs I'll be already recorded, so I'll just be mixing them, producing videos for them, and releasing them on my label over the next couple of years. So I really hope you all get a chance to listen to the music when it comes out. I think you'll really like it. A lot of really good stuff was recorded there with a lot of great musicians. You can find all of that through my own website. Finally, I want to thank everybody that watched the last video on soundproofing and all of the comments. It was just so great to get so many nice comments. Honestly, I was surprised how many people watched the video and took the time to comment on it. I figured I'd have like 100 views. So all those nice comments were really, really great. Except maybe the couple about my accent, which I know. I have the worst Boston accent on the planet. But my family came to Boston in 1901, I think. So there's a few generations of evolution in this accent. It's funny, when I was at Berklee College of Music, Berklee was always proud of how many students they had from different countries, as they should be. I mean, Berklee is, one of the greatest music schools in the world. And they at the end of the year, they'd always be like, well, Berklee has students from 98 countries, or Berklee has students this year from 120 countries. So the students would always be like, because we were always meeting and working with different people, they'd be like, oh, where are you from? Where are you from? Where are you from? Nobody had to ask where I was from. Everybody was like, you're from Boston, right? And I used to think, oh, maybe I should do something about this accent. But over the years, I came to wear it as a badge of honor. I mean, let's face it, Boston is a great city, one of the greatest cities in the country. So I gave up on changing that and just figured I'd go with it. But anyways, again, I want to thank you all for so many nice comments. I really appreciate it. It's tough on social media, right? You're putting yourself out there, so kind comments are very much welcome. God bless you all, and I want to wish everybody the most success with your musical and creative endeavors.